It began in silence, too perfect, too wide, too white. December 12th, 1939. The kind of winter morning when even the breath of men turns instantly to frost, and sound seems to die mid-air. A Soviet patrol, 15 men, strong, moved cautiously through a frozen forest near the Kola River in eastern Finland. The trees loomed heavy with snow, drooping under the weight of months without warmth. Every step crunched like breaking glass. Their wool coats had turned stiff as armor. Their eyelashes glittered with frost. And in that still, pale world, even the clank of a rifle strap sounded like a shout. They were part of the Red Army, the most powerful military machine on Earth, or so they believed. Stalin's empire had 1 million men pouring across Finland's borders. The war, they were told, would last 10 days. Helsinki would fall by Christmas. These 15 men were the tip of a spear aimed at a nation of farmers. They expected surrender, not resistance. The forest, however, had other plans. The first shot was almost polite, a sharp crack swallowed by snow. The man at the back of the patrol simply dropped. No scream, no smoke, no visible threat. The others froze, scanning the tree line. The lieutenant raised his hand for silence, the white vapor of his breath marking him like a beacon. 3 seconds later, the radio man collapsed 200 meters ahead, a neat hole through his chest. Panic. The soldiers dove for cover, but the snow offered none. Bullets whispered through the cold. Each shot came from nowhere, each body falling before anyone could locate the source. Crack. A machine gunner slumped over his weapon. Crack. A sergeant spun and fell backward. Crack. 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 3 minutes. 12 men dead. When the last 3 survivors crawled back to their lines hours later, frostbitten and delirious, their report made no sense. There had been no muzzle flash, no echo, no sign of life in the trees. Only death. The word spread quickly among the ranks. Blya smirked. The White Death. A ghost, they said. A phantom sniper haunting the snow. But the truth was far stranger. The ghost had a name. Simo Häyhä, a 33-year-old farmer from the village of Rautjärvi, barely 5'3", quiet, unremarkable, a man who loved dogs, hunting, and the slow rhythm of rural life. He had no desire for fame, no hatred for Russians, only a simple conviction that no foreign army should trample his land. When war came, he answered the call with the calm determination the Finns call Sisu, a word meaning unbreakable grit, born in the cold. To understand Simo, you have to understand the war he walked into, a war that should have been impossible. Only weeks earlier, Joseph Stalin had demanded that Finland cede territory along its eastern border and lease key ports for Soviet naval bases. He wanted a buffer against a potential German invasion. Finland refused. It was a tiny democracy of lakes, forests, and stubborn independence, and it would not trade its soil for peace. On November 30th, after staging a fake border attack near the village of Manila, the Red Army invaded. The imbalance was grotesque. The Soviet Union sent over 1 million troops. Finland had barely 300,000. Many of them farmers and woodsmen who had never fought outside a hunting season. The Soviets had 6,000 tanks, with 2 Finland, 32. The Soviets controlled 3,000 aircraft, Finland 114. Western newspapers pitied the small nation's courage, but wrote its obituary in advance. Yet statistics can't measure landscape or spirit. Finland was 70% forest, and in that winter of 1939, the forests were deep enough to swallow entire armies. The temperature dropped to -40 degrees Celsius. Oil froze in gun barrels, engines refused to start, and the snow reflected the moonlight like glass, exposing every moving shadow. For the Red Army, trained for mechanized assaults on open plains, they adapted quickly, turning the environment itself into a weapon. Rather than meet the enemy head-on, They let the Soviets advance down narrow forest roads and frozen lakes, then cut the columns into smaller motti, or bundles, surrounding and destroying each one in isolation. Finnish ski troops dressed entirely in white glided through the trees like spirits, striking supply lines, burning field kitchens, killing officers, and vanishing before anyone could fire back. It was unconventional warfare, perfected by necessity 1,000 small ambushes instead of one grand battle. And in this brutal chess match, where cold and silence killed as efficiently as bullets, Simo Häyhä became one of Finland's most lethal pieces. He joined the 34th Infantry Regiment at the Kolla front, a narrow choke point of frozen rivers and dense pine forest where the Red Army's advance had stalled. To most soldiers, it was a place of misery. Endless snow, deafening artillery, the stench of frostbite and burned fuel. The stillness of winter, the patience of hunting, these were his elements. He wasn't a career soldier. Before the war, he had spent his life shooting foxes and rabbits, competing in local marksmanship contests, winning medals few ever noticed. His precision came not from formal training, but from years of breathing with the wind, gauging distance by instinct, listening for echoes through trees. When his officers handed him a standard Finnish M28-30 rifle, a variant of the old Russian Mosin Nagant, they also offered him something else. A new Soviet scope. Most snipers would have accepted without question. Magnification meant power, range, and prestige. But Simo refused. To his commanders, it looked like madness. To Simo, it was logic. In the polar light of Kolla, a glass lens was a death sentence. Even a faint glint from the low sun could betray a sniper's position. Scopes also fogged instantly when the warmth of a human eye met the cold metal. And worst of all, they forced the shooter to lift his head higher above cover. In a flat white world, a few extra centimeters meant life or death. Simo chose the old iron sights. Simple, black, unreflective. He didn't need magnification. His kill zone would be within 400 meters. He valued invisibility over power, consistency over novelty. That single choice, that farmer's instinct to keep things simple, would turn him into a legend. The weeks that followed transformed the Kolla front into hell. The Red Army's tanks froze mid-route, their crews shivering beside dead engines. Soldiers in thin brown coats stood out like dark stains on a white canvas. Some froze upright, rifles still in their hands. Amid this chaos, Simo began his solitary hunts. Each dawn he would ski into no man's land with nothing but his rifle, a submachine gun, and a pouch of sugar cubes for energy. He'd find a small rise or fallen tree, pack the snow in front of his barrel, pour water on it until it froze solid, and settle in. He'd lie there for hours, motionless, breathing through snow held in his mouth to prevent any visible vapor. When the moment came, a Soviet officer consulting a map, a machine gun team setting up, he fired once. Then he vanished. Day after day, his tally grew. 5 kills, 8, 12. His officers doubted the reports until they sent an observer, who returned pale and speechless. Every shot had been real. On December 21st, Simo killed 25 men. On Christmas Day, 38. The legend of the White Death had begun not as propaganda, not as myth, but as one man's stubborn refusal to be seen. In the frozen forests of Kolla, silence had a new sound, the quiet precision of Simo Häyhä's rifle. And for the Red Army, every gust of snow might hide a ghost. The Soviet Union had called it a peace enforcement operation. But in reality, it was conquest, an empire attempting to erase a nation too small to matter on a map. Yet within days, Stalin's plan began to collapse under its own arrogance. The Red Army had marched into Finland, expecting parades. What they found instead were forests so thick that sunlight vanished by noon, frozen lakes that swallowed tanks whole, and a silence that pressed on their skulls like a physical weight. The soldiers had been trained for open-field warfare, for sweeping offensives with artillery and armor. But Finland offered no plains, only snow, ice, and shadows. The entire divisions got lost in the trees. Compass needles spun wildly in the cold. Radios froze solid. Commanders barked orders that no one could hear through the blizzard wind. Their mechanized columns, stretching for miles along narrow logging roads, became easy prey for unseen enemies. This was Motti warfare, the Finnish word for a bundle of firewood cut into pieces. The metaphor was perfect. Finnish ski troops didn't fight entire Soviet armies. They split them into smaller, digestible fragments and burned them one by one. A Soviet regiment would move down a road, headlights dimmed, engines growling. Then a sudden flash, a bridge collapsing under explosive charges. Snow swirled, trees cracked, and the column would halt. That's when the ghosts came. Silent figures in white camo, gliding over the drifts on skis, emerging from the dark pines. Grenades arced through the air. A burst of submachine gun fire. Officers fell first, cooks next. Anyone near the field kitchens. The Finns knew the psychology of hunger and cold. Take away warmth, food, and leadership. When daylight came, the attackers were gone, leaving behind scorched trucks and frozen corpses. By the time reinforcements arrived, the Finns were already 20 kilometers away, melting into another forest. To the outside world, it looked miraculous. How could a nation of barely 4 million people resist the Soviet juggernaut? The answer was the same word that defined their culture, Sisu. It wasn't courage exactly, or stubbornness. It was endurance beyond reason. The ability to keep moving through pain, through fear, through certainty of death. Sisu was what made men stay awake through 30-hour blizzards or ski barefoot when their boots had frozen solid. Simo Häyhä embodied that spirit perfectly. He wasn't an officer or a tactician. He didn't write battle reports or make speeches. He just did what needed to be done, methodically, quietly. His contribution was not measured in territory gained, but in lives taken one bullet, one soldier, at a time. But even in Finland's moments of success, the larger truth loomed. The numbers were still absurd. Stalin had more men than Finland had citizens. Each Soviet casualty could be replaced within a week. Each Finnish death was irreplaceable. The world watched with sympathy, but offered little else. Sweden sent volunteers and supplies. Britain and France sent speeches. The United States sent good wishes. And so Finland fought alone. At the collar front, the struggle had become biblical. David versus Goliath. Slingshot against tank. The snow itself was a weapon, turning the battlefield into something closer to purgatory. Temperatures dropped below -40 degrees. Oil thickened into jelly. The wooden stocks of rifles split apart. Frostbite claimed fingers before bullets did. The Red Army, unprepared for such conditions, began to unravel. Their green-brown uniforms, perfect for autumn, now marked them as targets against the blinding white snow. Machine gun crews froze to death beside their weapons. Horses stiffened in place, still harnessed to supply sleds. The Finns learned to spot them easily. Any figure that wasn't perfectly white was a corpse waiting to happen. Simo knew the terrain, like the lines on his palm. The same forests where he had hunted rabbits were now soaked in blood. His instincts as a hunter translated seamlessly to war. Patience, stillness, observation. But while other snipers focused on technique, Simo's genius lay in how he adapted to the cold. He understood things that army manuals never mentioned. How snow could betray you if you breathed wrong. How sunlight reflecting off frost could reveal the curve of your helmet. How the human body's warmth could become its worst enemy. Each morning, he would leave camp before dawn. The air at that hour was a living thing, so cold it burned, so still it carried sound for miles. Simo would ski for hours to find the perfect vantage point, a spot where the terrain dipped just enough to hide his outline. He'd dig a shallow pit, pack the snow tight around him, and pour water over the front to freeze it into an ice shield. When he fired, the blast wouldn't disturb the surface. No puff, no plume, just silence. He even altered his breathing. At 40 below zero, a man's exhale hung in the air like smoke. So Simo filled his mouth with snow, cooling his breath before it escaped. To anyone watching through a scope, there would be no trace of life, no movement, no warmth, no cloud of vapor. By the time the Soviets realized what they were up against, it was too late. Reports began to circulate of an unseen shooter who killed without sound or flash. Soviet snipers were dispatched to hunt him, but none returned. Patrols vanished into the forest and never came back. Every tree, every snowbank could hide death. Panic spread like frostbite. For the Red Army, it was no longer a war, it was a haunting. Soldiers refused to light campfires or move at dawn. Entire units begged to be reassigned. The once proud divisions that had expected victory parades now spoke of demons and invisible hunters. And in the middle of it all, Simo Häyhä worked with the precision of a craftsman. He logged his kills at the end of each day with the same detachment he might use for tallying bales of hay. When asked how many, he would answer simply, 5 today, or 12. His commanding officer, Lieutenant Arne Jutelainen, a veteran nicknamed the Terror of Morocco, didn't believe him at first. 12 confirmed kills in one day seemed impossible. Doctrine said a sniper might achieve 1 or 2 at best, so he sent an observer to watch. The man returned at dusk, pale and trembling, confirming every shot. Word spread through the regiment. The quiet farmer from Rautjärvi wasn't just good, he was rewriting the limits of what one man could do. On December 21st, Simo recorded 25 kills. The next day, 23. On Christmas Day, 38 confirmed. In a single 24-hour period, that number would become legend. The Red Army could not explain it. Stalin's officers blamed spies, secret weapons, witchcraft, anything but the truth. That one man with a simple rifle, iron sights, and unshakable patience was dismantling their army piece by piece. By now, the front at Kola had become a place of whispers. Soviet soldiers refused to patrol certain sectors after dusk. They called it the Valley of the Dead. Officers banned the use of scopes during sunrise, fearing the flash of glass would draw the ghost's attention. Yet even as fear grew, the Finnish soldiers who fought beside Simo didn't see him as a myth. To them, he was still a humble farmer who ate bread and sugar cubes and slept in a foxhole. He never spoke of hatred, never celebrated a kill. His motivation was simpler, to protect his home. And that quiet resolve, more than his skill, was what made him terrifying. As December bled into January, the legend of the White Death grew. He was not just a sniper anymore. He was a symbol of resistance, the embodiment of Sisu. Where technology froze and strategy failed, one man's discipline thrived. In the frozen woods of Finland, Goliath had met something worse than David. He had met silence armed with a rifle. The Red Army had manuals, strategies, and machines. Simo Häyhä had logic plain, unshakable, farmer's logic. To him, the battlefield wasn't chaos. It was a frozen field waiting to be read. Each gust of wind told a story. Each shadow a warning. Where others saw death, Simo saw structure angles, timing, rhythm. When the cold deepened to -40, even the crack of a rifle sounded dull, swallowed by snow. It was the perfect theatre for a man who understood silence better than words. His weapon was the Finnish M28-30 rifle. Sturdy and accurate, built on an old Mosin-Nagant frame, but perfected by Finnish gunsmiths. Its iron sights were black, non-reflective, nearly invisible against the white glare. The barrel had a unique tight bore that improved precision, and Simo knew its behavior intimately, the way it rose after a shot, the precise shift of its recoil. He had used rifles like it since boyhood, hunting small game for his family's table. His commanders thought it superstition or stubborn pride, but Simo had 3 clear reasons, each born from experience, not ego. Even a sliver of reflected sunlight could betray his position to another sniper hundreds of meters away. Second, a scope fogged instantly when warm breath met cold glass. A sniper might lift his weapon only to see a blur of white. Third, the posture itself, raising one's head higher to look through a scope added inches above the snow line, inches that separated hunters from targets. Simo valued low visibility more than range. He didn't need magnification. His world was measured in 300 meters or less distance. He could judge by the sound of a man's voice, by how snow crunched beneath boots. But his real genius came not from the weapon, but from how he merged with the environment itself. He didn't simply hide in snow. He became it. Before taking a shot, Simo would spend an hour crafting his position. He chose a small rise, a natural hollow, or the trunk of a fallen pine, then head-packed the snow around his barrel, pouring water until it froze into a solid crust. The next shot would produce no telltale puff of snow, no sign of a muzzle blast. To counter snipers, that puff was everything. It told them, here. Without it, they were blind. Even his breathing was engineered for stealth. He'd fill his mouth with snow to cool his exhale, ensuring no fog escaped into the air. When he breathed out, it was the same temperature as the wind. Nothing for enemy optics to catch. A Soviet sniper searching through a scope would look for 3 signs: movement, muzzle smoke, or breath. Simo offered none. No movement, no smoke, no breath. To them, he was nothing. To him, they were shadows. Each morning began the same. Before dawn, while most soldiers huddled for warmth, Simo prepared for the hunt. Head slip on his layered white camouflage, shoulder his rifle and KP-31 submachine gun, and glide away on skis. The forest swallowed him. Sometimes he moved alone for miles, leaving no tracks except faint indentations soon covered by new snowfall. He hunted officers first. He'd study Soviet behavior like a biologist observing animals where they paused to smoke, how they gestured when giving orders, which direction they looked when nervous. Then he waited. Hours. Sometimes an entire day without moving more than his trigger finger. He didn't feel the cold anymore. He was the cold. When the moment came, he didn't breathe. He didn't blink. A faint exhale. A crack, like breaking ice, and the officer dropped before his subordinates even realized what had happened. By the time they did, the snowbank that had concealed their executioner was just a mound among thousands. He never fired twice from the same place. After every shot, he'd glide to another prepared nest, sometimes 100 meters away, sometimes more. The Soviets, thinking they'd found him, would unleash artillery on the first position. Trees exploded, snow turned to smoke, the earth quaked, and Simo, unharmed, would be waiting from another angle. The rhythm became mechanical. Shoot, relocate, wait, repeat. His superior officers began tracking his count. At first, they didn't believe it. 5? In a day? Maybe. 12? Impossible. But by December 21st, his daily tallies read like fiction. 25 kills one day, 23 the next, 38 on Christmas Day. His observer confirmed every one. 38 kills in a single day, with iron sights, without ever being seen. To the Finnish frontline soldiers, Simo was both hero and mystery. To the Red Army, he was terror incarnate. Soviet reports began to describe a phantom shooter who could not be found, could not be heard, could not be stopped. Propaganda officers tried to suppress the panic, calling it Finnish exaggeration. But soldiers knew better. The fear spread faster than frostbite. Men refused to patrol at dawn. Campfires went unlit even in -40 degrees. When night came, the forests seemed alive. Every creak of a tree branch, every whisper of wind over ice, felt like an omen. The ghost could be anywhere. Simo wasn't trying to be a legend. He was simply efficient. The more the Soviets feared him, the less they advanced. Every bullet saved a Finnish life. That was enough. His commander, Lieutenant Juutilainen, started calling him the magic shooter. Others whispered Taika Ampuja, the enchanted marksman. Simo shrugged off the titles. He didn't believe in magic. He believed in preparation. Yet what he was doing did look like magic. His methods defied conventional warfare. He used nature as an accomplice, not a backdrop. When the Red Army sent snipers to hunt him, Simo watched their scopes glint through the snow. He'd wait until they thought they were safe, then place a single bullet through the lens, destroying the scope, the rifle, and the man behind it in one clean line. Each shot was not just skill, it was psychological warfare. Soviet snipers began covering their lenses with cloth, terrified to even look. Still, Simo remained patient. He wasn't chasing records. He was protecting his land one trigger pull at a time. By mid-January, his name had reached Helsinki. Newspapers quietly mentioned a farmer turned sniper holding the line at collar. International journalists began calling him the White Death. It sounded mythical, almost cinematic. But Simo didn't care. He avoided interviews, refused photo sessions. To him, attention was dangerous. Fame was noise. He stayed in the woods, and the woods listened to him. Some Finnish soldiers later recalled that even in the chaos of artillery fire, they could sense when Simo was near. There was a strange calm in the air, a confidence that the ghost was watching over them. It's an odd thing, to find comfort in a man who had become death itself, but war rewires the mind. For the Finns, Simo wasn't just killing enemies. He was freezing fear before it reached their trenches. For the Soviets, he had become a curse, whispered by dying men. They gave him a new title in their field, reports Belaya Smert, the White Death. Orders were issued, find and kill the farmer. But how do you kill something that leaves no trace? In February, the Red Army began sending specialized hunter teams to track him. None returned. Some were found frozen. Others shot through the eye. The rest simply vanished into the snow. Each body discovered by Soviet patrols told the same story. One precise bullet, no sign of a fight. As weeks turned to months, even Simo's comrades struggled to grasp what had achieved. By early March, his confirmed count exceeded 200, then 300, then 400. By the time the Winter War neared its brutal end, he would surpass 500 confirmed sniper kills, an unbreakable record. For now, in the heart of that endless white forest, one man's quiet defiance had changed the rhythm of war itself. The world's largest army had invaded with tanks and doctrine, and one farmer answered with snow and patience. By late January 1940, Simo Häyhä had become more than a problem, he was an obsession. Soviet commanders at the collar front no longer spoke of advancing or capturing territory. Their new mission, quietly passed through the ranks, was singular: find and kill the White Death. The world's largest military machine had been halted by a farmer who carried an old rifle without a scope. Every day, their casualty lists grew longer, while Simo's name spread further. Fear was spreading faster than the frostbite. Morale was collapsing. Soldiers began refusing orders to patrol certain sectors. Some muttered prayers before stepping into the trees. Others deserted outright, claiming to have seen the ghost with no face. Something had to be done. The Soviet command responded the way all bureaucracies do. When confronted with the inexplicable, by throwing more men at the problem, first came the snipers. They sent their best men trained at the Moscow sniper schools, armed with high-powered rifles fitted with precision P-scopes. These were professionals, decorated marksmen who could split a coin at 300 meters. Their orders were simple. They never returned. Each time, Simo found them first. The gleam of their scopes betrayed them long before they spotted him. One by one, he put bullets through glass, through eyes, through skulls. When Finnish scouts later examined the bodies, they found shattered optics and unmarked snow, no sign of where the shot had come from. Simo's legend grew again. When marksmanship failed, the Soviets escalated. If you couldn't kill the ghost with precision, you would drown him in fire. They began using artillery not in support of infantry, but as blind vengeance. The new order from Soviet command. Whenever a single shot is heard, saturate the entire sector. Dozens, sometimes hundreds, of shells rained down upon the suspected firing point. Trees exploded. Snow turned black. The air filled with splinters and smoke. One day, more than 100 shells struck the small ridge where Simo had been sighted. But an hour later, Simo walked back into camp, white uniform shredded, face streaked with soot, blood dried along his cheek. He said nothing except, "They were loud today." Then he ate a piece of bread, cleaned his rifle, and went back out. It was becoming clear that this was no ordinary soldier. For the Red Army, killing him was now a matter of pride. They gathered their best sharpshooters into a single platoon, 30 men, each equipped with semi-automatic SVT, 40 rifles, machine guns for support, and extra ammunition. Their mission was explicit: track and eliminate the White Death. They entered the forest just before dawn. The snow was deep, the air brittle, their breath rising in clouds. They moved in careful formation, scanning the horizon for movement. Somewhere ahead, unseen, Simo waited. He had been there since midnight, buried under a blanket of snow, rifle resting on its frozen perch. He had already measured the wind, the light, the sound. His patience was inhuman. Then the machine gun team. Then the lieutenant. His scopeless rifle tracked the last man in line, the radio operator. Crack. The sound was so soft that the platoon leader didn't even flinch. Then the radio man folded silently into the snow. The lieutenant spun, shouted, and chaos erupted. The machine gun opened fire on the tree line, bullets ripping through bark and branches. The rest scattered, dropping into prone positions, eyes darting through the fog. They had no target. They were shooting at ghosts. While they poured ammunition into the wrong patch of forest, Simo was already gone. He didn't run. He glided, skis whispering over snow. He moved 300 meters to the left, to a position he had prepared the day before. A shallow pit, packed snow, iced over muzzle nest perfect. He waited again. When the lieutenant raised his head to shout new orders, Simo fired. One shot. Some men crawled toward the trees. Others froze, afraid to move. The temperature dropped, wind rising like a voice. By nightfall, they were still there, cold, leaderless, terrified. Around midnight, 6 of them broke. Unable to bear the cold, they gathered in a small clearing and lit a fire for warmth. The flicker of flame reflected off their faces, a small comfort in the endless dark. Simo was 200 meters away. He didn't reach for his rifle this time. He took his KP, 31 submachine gun, its 71-round drum loaded and ready. He crept closer, unseen. Then he rose from the snow and opened fire. The forest exploded in noise. The burst lasted less than 10 seconds. When silence returned, the fire was still burning, but the men around it lay motionless. The remaining Soviets fled into the night, shooting wildly, some dropping their weapons in panic. The cold would finish what Simo had started. The next morning, Finnish patrols found 27 bodies scattered across the forest floor. The elite counter-sniper platoon was gone. This wasn't a battle. It was an execution. From that day, the White Death ceased to be a man. He became myth. Soviet soldiers began scribbling new rules into their diaries. Rules for surviving in collar. Rule 1. Never light a fire. Rule 2. Never rush to help a wounded comrade. The ghost waits for the medic. Rule 3. Never walk alone, but never group together. Both mean death. A letter recovered from the body of a Soviet soldier named Pavel captured the horror perfectly. Mother, this is not war. This is hell. We do not fear the Finns. We fear the silence. When the guns stop, it means he is watching. The silence is the White Death. The fear became contagious. Soviet troops stopped whispering his name aloud. Commanders banned talk of the ghost. But superstition moves faster than orders. Some soldiers tied strips of red cloth to their rifles, believing it would ward off his bullet. Others carried icons of saints, kissed them before stepping outside. Meanwhile, the Finns saw the change. The enemy's advance slowed. Their attacks lost coordination. The forest that had once trembled under Soviet artillery now stood eerily quiet, as if the invaders themselves were holding their breath. Simo continued his routine, unbothered by the storm he had created. He ate little, slept less, and spoke rarely. Each kill was recorded by his superior, Lieutenant Jutelainen, in neat pencil marks on paper, a grim ledger of efficiency. Every bullet fired at the front seemed aimed at him. Soviet spotters searched for any sign, a movement, a reflection, a shadow that might reveal where the White Death lay waiting. To counter this, Simo became even more meticulous. He changed nests constantly. Even between shots, he fired from angles that defied logic from low valleys, from behind frozen logs, even through holes carved in the ice. He used decoys, setting up snow mounds shaped like heads to draw enemy fire, then targeting the flash of their muzzle in return. Still, the pressure mounted. The Soviets were desperate. Their artillery intensified. Mortar shells rained down day and night. Entire sections of the forest were blasted to splinters. The pristine white world turned black and grey, littered with craters and twisted pine trunks. The Finns began calling it the Koller Holocaust, a forest systematically erased. And yet, amid the ruin, the White Death endured. The constant bombardment made his work easier. The thunder of shells masked his shots. The smoke hid his movement. Where others cowered, he adapted. Every time the Soviets tried to bury him under fire, he rose again, a ghost that refused to die. By early March, his confirmed kills had passed 500. 500 soldiers. Entire platoons wiped out by one man with iron sights and patience. The Red Army was exhausted, broken in spirit. Their generals had lost faith in both strategy and superstition. If the cold hadn't beaten them, the ghost had. But war has a way of catching up, even to its phantoms. March 6, 1940. The war had lasted 100 days. 100 days longer than Stalin's generals ever imagined it could. The Koller front was collapsing under the sheer weight of Soviet artillery. The air was no longer white, but grey with smoke and ash. The snow that had once hidden men now churned with mud and blood. Through that storm of iron, Simo Häyhä still hunted. He had already killed several that morning. Each time he fired, he changed position, vanishing like vapor. He no longer felt the fatigue or the hunger. His body had adapted to the rhythm of killing and surviving. But that day, even the ghost of Koller could not outrun chance. Around noon, a Soviet counter-sniper spotted a brief flicker, a movement so small that it could have been a trick of the wind. He aimed, breathed, and fired an explosive round. The bullet struck Simo in the face. The impact was catastrophic. It entered his left cheek and detonated inside his mouth, shattering both jaws, tearing away part of his face. His rifle dropped. His vision went white. He fell backward into the snow, unable to scream, his blood turning steam in the cold. Nearby Finnish soldiers saw him fall. They rushed through the shellfire, expecting to find their hero dead. One man later recalled, half his head was gone. They lifted what they thought was a corpse and carried it back to camp. Simo's pulse was gone. His breathing stopped. The White Death was pronounced dead. He was placed with the other bodies, frozen in rows, waiting for burial. But legends, it seems, are stubborn. Hours later, a soldier passing the pile saw movement. One leg twitched. Then another. He called for help. When they pulled back the blanket, They found Simo, still alive, eyes open but unseeing, face mangled beyond recognition. He had no jaw, no tongue to speak, yet his heart still beat. They carried him to a field hospital, where doctors, horrified but fascinated, did everything they could. He drifted in and out of consciousness for a week, hovering between life and death. By the time Simo opened his eyes again, the war was over. March 13th, 1940. The Winter War ended with the Moscow Peace Treaty. Finland had lost 11% of its territory, including Simo's home region of Rautjärvi. But it had survived. Against impossible odds, a nation of farmers and hunters had forced the Red Army to a standstill. The cost for the Soviets was staggering. More than 1 million casualties, over 3,000 tanks destroyed, 600 aircraft lost. Their 2-week campaign had turned into a blood-soaked humiliation. And at the center of that humiliation was one man, the farmer who had killed more enemy soldiers than anyone in modern history. Simo's official confirmed sniper kill count stood at 505. Another 200 or more were estimated from his submachine gun engagements. In less than 100 days, he had wiped out an entire battalion. For Finland, he was a national hero. For the Soviet Union, he was a nightmare they could not erase. When word reached the Finnish High Command that Simo was alive, disbelief turned to reverence. He was promoted from corporal to second lieutenant, the fastest battlefield promotion in Finnish history. He received the Cross of Kola, the nation's highest wartime honor, but honors meant little to a man who could no longer smile. Simo's injuries were horrific. He had lost most of his lower face. Doctors performed 26 surgeries to rebuild it, taking bone from his hip to craft a new jaw, skin from his thigh to form a new cheek. He couldn't eat solid food for months. He spoke only in short, slurred phrases. When asked what he remembered of the moment he was shot, he later wrote on a scrap of paper, "I saw a flash, and then the world was silent." While he healed, the world changed. Finland's survival had consequences far beyond its borders. Adolf Hitler, watching from Berlin, studied the Winter War with fascination. The Red Army's incompetence, its broken communication, its fear of the cold, all convinced him that the Soviet Union was a rotten structure that would crumble with one hard kick. If this is what Stalin's army can do against a few thousand Finns, he told his generals, then it will not stand a chance against Germany. 18 months later, he launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. Historians would debate forever whether Simo Häyhä's war influenced that decision, but many agreed that the fear he and the Finnish army inspired the humiliation inflicted on Stalin's war machine played its part. A single farmer, in some quiet way, had helped alter the trajectory of the Second World War. Meanwhile, Simo continued his own private battle to reclaim his life. He spent 14 months in hospitals, enduring skin grafts, reconstructive surgery, endless recovery. When he finally looked into a mirror again, he did not flinch. The left side of his face was collapsed, his mouth permanently twisted, his jawline replaced by a thin, scarred ridge. The White Death now carried his legend on his own skin. When the Continuation War began in 1941, Simo tried to rejoin the army. He was rejected. His body could no longer bear the cold or recoil. The army honored him, but quietly set him aside. The ghost had done his work. So he returned to what he knew best: silence, solitude, and the woods. The Finnish government granted him a small farm in the town of Ruokolahti, where he lived the rest of his life as a hunter and dog breeder. He never married. He rarely spoke of the war. To the young soldiers who came to visit him in later years, he seemed impossibly humble. When asked how he became the most successful sniper in history, he simply said, "Practice." When journalists pressed him about killing over 500 men, his answer was even colder. "I did what I was told, and I did it as well as I could." That was Simo Häyhä modesty wrapped around steel. For all his fame, he lived quietly. He hunted moose, trained dogs, tended his land. His face remained scarred, but his spirit never broke. The old rifle, the M2830, was mounted on his wall not as a trophy, but as a tool that had once done its job to the world. He was the White Death. To his neighbors, he was just Simo, the quiet farmer, who always shoveled his own snow, who never complained about the weather, who still rose before dawn to walk in the forest. But every winter, when the temperature dropped and the snow began to fall, his legend returned. They remembered the man who had turned ice into armor, breath into invisibility, patience into power. The bullet that struck Simo had disfigured him, but it hadn't stopped him. It had simply written the final punctuation on a story already larger than life. He would live 6 more decades, long enough to see his name printed in history books, long enough to receive visitors from around the world who came to shake the hand that had fired 500 times without error. And through it all, he never changed his view. When asked late in life what he thought of war, Simo's answer was as short as his aim was true. War is not something you can describe. You can only endure it. When he died in 2002, at the age of 96, Finland mourned quietly. In the end, the man who had once terrified an empire returned to what he had always been, a silent figure in a white landscape, indistinguishable from the snow itself. In the years that followed the Winter War, Finland changed, Europe burned, and the world forgot, at least for a while. But in a small wooden farmhouse surrounded by birch trees, one man lived exactly as he always had. Quietly, methodically, without complaint. Simo Häyhä's war had ended, yet his discipline never did. He woke at dawn, walked his land, fed his dogs, cleaned his tools. When asked about his wounds, he would smile a crooked, painful smile that somehow seemed gentler for its scars and say, "It could have been worse." He refused pity. The doctors had rebuilt his face with bone and skin from other parts of his body, but they could not restore his speech completely. Talking was painful, so he preferred not to. When visitors asked questions, he often nodded or wrote a few words in neat, careful handwriting. Sometimes he would take them outside instead to show the tracks of elk in the snow or demonstrate how to read wind direction by the tilt of pine needles. He had become, once again, what he had always been, a hunter. Only the prey and the purpose had changed. In Ruokolahti, he was a local curiosity, but never a celebrity. Neighbors knew who he was, but respected his privacy. He attended church, bred dogs, and took part in hunting contests. On those occasions, people sometimes noticed that he could still hit a coin at 200 meters without effort. The legend hadn't dulled with age. He was never boastful. He didn't drink much, didn't smoke, didn't seek company. When pressed about the war, he dismissed it with simple phrases. It had to be done. I was lucky. Or, sometimes, the cold helped. That was all. But Finland did not forget. In the decades after the war, as the nation rebuilt and the Cold War shadow grew, the memory of the Winter War hardened into national identity. A story of endurance, of impossible resistance, of Sisu. And in that mythology, Simo Häyhä stood like a figure carved from ice, proof that individual courage could hold back an empire. For historians, his legacy was both awe and paradox. He had killed more men than any other sniper in recorded history, yet he had done so without cruelty or passion. There was no hatred in his method, no thrill in his success. It was as if he had treated killing as an unfortunate craft to be done cleanly and efficiently until no longer required. Some scholars would later write that Simo represented the ethical hunter, a man who kills not for power, but for necessity, guided by precision, never excess. Others saw something darker, the embodiment of how war transforms morality into mathematics, how one man's discipline could become another's nightmare. Simo, for his part, refused to participate in any of these interpretations. He had no interest in fame or philosophy. When the army invited him to attend military celebrations, he politely declined, When journalists mailed him questions, he sometimes replied with a single line: practice. That one word became his final answer to everything. In the 1960s and 70s, the world rediscovered him. Foreign magazines ran articles about the White Death. Military historians from Britain, America, and Japan traveled to Finland to interview him. They arrived expecting a brooding killer, a scarred veteran haunted by ghosts. Instead, they found an old man with clear eyes and calm gestures, serving coffee in a small kitchen, occasionally pausing to pat the head of one of his hunting dogs. When one reporter asked if he regretted killing so many people, Simo looked out the window at the snowy fields and said, slowly, through his rebuilt jaw, "I did what I was told. I did it as well as I could." That line would echo through every article, every documentary that followed. It was not pride, nor apology. It was simply truth, the kind that sounds almost colder than the snow. To the Finnish people, Simo became both legend and lesson. His story was taught in military schools, not as a model of violence, but of patience. Cadets studied his techniques, the compact snow walls, the ice muzzle, the breath control, as principles of adaptation and clarity under pressure. The same qualities that made him a killer also defined him as a craftsman of survival. His simple logic, keep low, stay calm, never be seen, outlived the war itself. Sniper doctrines across the world, from the US Marines to modern special forces, later echoed his methods without even knowing his name. Time softened the myth, but never erased it. In 1989, on the 50th anniversary of the Winter War, Simo appeared briefly on Finnish television. He was 90 years old then, face still marked by the old wound, eyes sharp as ice. The interviewer asked what advice he would give to young soldiers. Simo paused for a long time. Then, with the faintest trace of humor, he said, "Aim well." The audience laughed. He smiled, that crooked smile again, and for a moment, the legend felt human. In his later years, he spent more time in the forests than in town. Even with his age, he could still ski for hours. Neighbors sometimes spotted him at dawn, moving across the snow in silence, carrying his rifle not as a weapon but as a companion. He once told a friend, "The woods never ask questions. They just listen." He outlived almost everyone from his generation, his comrades, his commanders, even his enemies. The war receded into history books, but the forest still looked the same. Tall pines, heavy snow, the air so still it felt sacred. In 2002, at the age of 96, Simo Häyhä passed away peacefully in a veterans' nursing home. His funeral was small, just family, soldiers, and a few hunters. They laid him to rest in Ruokolahti, not far from the lakes where he used to ski as a boy. On his coffin rested a single rifle, the same model he had used 60 years earlier, and a sprig of pine. No speeches, no gun salute, only the silence he had once commanded so completely. Today, visitors still come to his grave. Some leave coins, others bullets polished clean, and some just stand quietly, as if afraid to disturb the air. No boast, no numbers, just the name and the legend that no longer needed explanation. If history has a rhythm, Simo's story beats in the quieter parts, in the spaces between artillery shells and speeches, between snowflakes and breaths. It's the rhythm of endurance, of someone who refuses to break even when the world tries to erase him. He began as a farmer, became a phantom, and ended as a symbol of humility. The lesson he left behind is not one of killing, but of clarity, technology, ideology, numbers. All of it failed in the snow of Kola. What survived were the simple things: patience, preparation, awareness. A man who knew how to listen to the cold defeated an army that did not. And when the snow finally melted, what remained was not his rifle, nor his medals, but the idea that even in the noisiest wars, silence can win. So when the wind howls through Finland's forests in winter, locals still tell stories of the White Death. They say that sometimes, if you stop and hold your breath, You can hear the faint click of a bolt being drawn back somewhere deep in the trees. Not a threat, but a reminder of a man who turned the impossible into the inevitable, who used simplicity as his sharpest weapon. Simo Häyhä was never interested in being remembered, but history remembered him anyway. He remains the quiet proof that victory does not always belong to the loudest armies, but to the stillest hearts.